The film begins with a visual of a spaceship deep in space, sent on a search and rescue mission, and inside, Benjamin is woken up by the ship's support AI system, Sweetie. He asks Sweetie why she woke him up, and she tells him that she wanted to run an unscheduled test. Feeling confused, Benjamin asks why she wanted to do that, but the AI simply tells him that she wants to play chess. In a different part of the ship, AJ, the captain of the craft, is recording himself as he analyzes the animated movie Tom and Jerry. Nick, the co-captain of the ship, is getting a full medical check by the AI, who tells him that he has elevated stress levels and that he needs to work on it. The medical officer, Kayla, takes a look at Nick's medical charts and confirms that everything was okay with him, and Kayla tells Nick that she's noticed his introverted behavior and encourages him to make more of an effort with the crew. Kayla asks Nick why he'd asked to be assigned to a paramedic ship even though he was an ex-military. Nick tells her that he likes deep space because it's quiet, and Kayla prescribes Nick a pill that he's supposed to take once a day, then leaves. Nick meets Benjamin and they start playing cards while Sweetie assesses the game. Benjamin tells Nick that he added a few human-like characteristics to Sweetie so she could seem more human, but he did this in secret. As the crew go about their day, they suddenly receive a stress signal coming from an ice mining operation on the moon, Titan 37, which was more than 3,000 light-years away. The crew decided that they're going to answer the call and head there to check out the situation, and to travel thousands of light-years away, the crew had to make a dimension jump toward the location. The team starts preparing for the jump, a process that requires them to take all of their clothes off and enter a small pod that would keep their bodies from being affected when they go through the wormhole. Once they were all ready, they got into their respective pods and started the process. The ship was engulfed by a bright silver light, which was electricity that would help it move through time and space. The ship finally makes it through the wormhole and reaches its destination, and the first one to wake up was Yerzy. He gets out of the pod and started checking on the others, and the team awoke one by one but realized that their captain had been injured during the trip. While Kayla tries to help AJ, the ship starts to malfunction due to impact with debris cloud while they were making their journey, which makes the ship lose 82% of its fuel. Kayla tries to help AJ, but his injuries were more than she could handle and he passes. Nick hurries to the main control center where he sees their ship had stumbled upon a blue giant with an incredibly high gravity field. After struggling with the controls for a while, Nick manages to stabilize the ship, and he asks Sweetie to assess the situation of the ship, and she tells him that the ship would need to be charged for 17 hours to escape being incinerated, which would also occur in about 17 hours. After the traumatic events of the day, Nick heads to Kayla's room and asks her to have a drink with him. The two then share a very intimate moment which leads to them making love, and in their private room, Danica and Yerzy were having a conversation about having children. Yerzy tells her that she'd started the application process to get them approved to have a child ever since she mentioned it. Danica is worried that their request might be denied, but Yerzy assures her that it won't. Benjamin goes through the ship's system and finds out that AJ's pod hadn't malfunctioned during the jump but before. He informs Kayla and Nick about his finding, which really confuses them. Benjamin is sure that the captain had known about the malfunction but chose to proceed with the jump anyway. Kayla tells Benjamin that AJ probably thought it was a risk worth taking, and Nick calls a meeting and informs the crew of their situation. He explains that they had lost most of their fuel but had enough to keep the ship afloat until it charges, keeping them from being completely incinerated. He tells them that once the ship charges, they'd be able to dimension jump back home. The worried crew asks him how much time they would have between the ship's complete charge and the incineration, and Nick tells them that they only have an 11-minute window to make it. During their discussion, Sweetie informs them that there was another ship approaching theirs, and the team gets ready to make contact with the newcomers by suiting up and waiting on the landing dock. Once the new ship connects with theirs, Danica, Yerzy, and Kayla, they put out the fire on his suit and open his helmet, and they find the man unconscious. Kayla uses the comm to inform Nick of what they found and tells him that it was not the person that sent the original distress call. She performs a number of medical checks on the man as he sleeps and leaves to speak to Nick after telling Danica to keep an eye on the patient. Danica goes to bring the patient some supplies and finds him conscious when she returns. Carl asks her how long he'd been out and she informs him that it's only been 20 minutes. Danica leaves Carl after telling him that she was going to go get him some clothes, and on the other part of the ship, Kayla, Nick, and Benjamin discuss how they're supposed to transport 6 people through the dimensional jump when one of their pods is actually damaged. Nick offers to stay behind and wait to be rescued, but Kayla refuses because she knows that if he stayed, he would die. She heads to the lab where she performs a few more checkups on Carl and asks him questions about himself. Kayla tells him that she knew someone else with his name, and he tells her that he was named after his dad, who was actually Kayla's ex-boyfriend. Carl tells her that his father had died 3 years ago and would always tell him to call Kayla if he needed anything. Carl tells Kayla and Nick that he'd been stranded there after his friends left him, and he tells them that they'd come there to scavenge, but he apparently didn't find anything. Nick asks Carl to tell him where his friends were, but Carl refuses to give up their location. He tells them that he can help them find fuel to get them away from the pull of the blue giant, and Nick leaves to prepare the ship so that Carl could lead them to the fuel. Nick orders Yerzy to check Carl's ship because he feels really suspicious of Carl. While searching Carl's ship, Yerzy finds a glowing blue object and is mesmerized, and he calls Nick on the comm and tells him to come down to the ship immediately. When Nick gets to the ship, Yerzy shows him what he had found and tells him that it was the most amazing thing that he'd ever seen. They take the object to their lab and let Sweetie run diagnostics on it, and when they ask Carl why he hadn't disclosed that he had an object like this, Carl tells them that he was a treasure hunter and he wanted to keep what he found to himself. He explains that he intercepted a stray transmission 3 years ago and followed it, and he stumbled upon the object, which the team thinks is some kind of an old alien technology. Carl tells the team that he would give them a cut of 5% for the money that he would get from the technology if they help him get back home. Yerzy gets upset by the offer and tells Carl that he was the one that found it last and maybe he should cut him a percentage. Nick thinks that the best course of action would be to get rid of the device, but Carl refuses. Kayla tells Carl that he had contact with the object, and she thinks that he has some kind of bone growth that she's never really seen before. Despite Carl's consistent interjection, Nick decides to get rid of the object as soon as possible. He takes a small ship and heads down to the moon to see if they can retrieve the oil Carl promised that they would find. As the team go about their tasks, Carl starts stirring up trouble. He tells Danica that he can tell she wants to have a child and asks her if Yerzy was the right man to do it with. He seduces Danica by telling her that she should be with another man to know if she's sure about Yerzy, and takes her to a private place so they can engage in adult activities. Kayla continues to do the research on the strange object that they found in Carl's ship and discovers that the device contained 9-dimensional matters. Sweetie explains to Kayla that the object was a bomb and the explosion would be able to replenish the elements essential to life. She explains her findings to Benjamin by telling him that the object was a creation device used to keep the universe young, but if they take it home, it would vaporize their entire solar system. After doing it with Carl, a very guilty Danica finds Yerzy naked in the lab, sleeping with his hands on the strange object. She wakes him up and wraps him in a blanket, and she tells him that she was ready to have a child, which makes him really happy. After his prolonged contact with the device, Yerzy seems to have developed superhuman abilities in youth. Kayla scans Yerzy's body and discovers that his body was growing in muscle mass. On the moon, Nick discovers the mining shaft and bodies of the people that used to work there, and Nick tells Sweetie to create a direct call to Kayla, but the lines were being jammed by Carl, who was back on the ship. Carl starts communicating with Nick and tells him that it was only 2 of them on the line. He tells Nick that he'd exaggerated the existence of fuel down in the mines and explains that he would be able to control the equipment in the mines from the ship. Carl then starts locking up the doors in the shaft and he leaves Nick trapped. He tells him that he'll be taking the treasure he found and his girl back home. Carl explains that he was the same person that Kayla used to date and he is not his son, and that he had become young again because of the strange alien device. Nick escapes the trap Carl had set and tries to hurry back to the ship that he'd come in, but before he could, Carl automatically controls it and flies back to the mothership. While recalling the ship, Carl is interrupted by Danica, who asks him what he's doing. He tells Danica that he was trying to help Nick get back, but that he failed in doing so and that he didn't make it. Not believing his lie, Danica attacks Carl, who pushes her into the shaft atop the control room and opens the hatch and sends her into outer space. Carl then heads to the lab where he finds Yerzy staring at the object, and unfortunately, he attacks Yerzy and beats him to death. He then proceeds to hide his body in one of the pods. While returning to the control room, Carl runs into Kayla and tries to come clean about who he was, but before he could get a word out, Benjamin appears from the other side with a gun that was aimed right at Carl. Benjamin tells Kayla that Carl had abandoned Nick on the moon and that he couldn't find both Danica and Yerzy. He fires the gun, impaling Carl on the wall, and Benjamin and Kayla run to the supply closet to retrieve more guns that would help them fight Carl. After getting the guns, the two separate and try to find Carl, and Benjamin runs into Carl, who had developed the ability to heal instantly. Although he fires his gun at him repeatedly, Carl was able to overwhelm Benjamin and he kills him. Carl then heads to the control room where he finds Kayla trying to find a way to rescue Nick, and he tells her who who he really was and explains to her that he'd sent the distress call on purpose so she could come to him, and Kayla tries to tell him that the object was changing him into something inhuman, but Carl tells her that he was okay with it. While they were conversing, Nick connects to the ship's comms and starts antagonizing Carl. He'd find an old ship on the moon and was making his way back to the ship. Kayla escapes Carl's grip and runs down to the landing pad to meet Nick. Just as Nick boards the ship, Carl comes running through the door and attacks Nick. They engage in hand-to-hand combat in which Carl had the upper hand. And knowing it wouldn't be a fair fight, Nick and Kayla escape and head toward the lab. They take the alien object and put it inside an eject pod so they can throw it into outer space. Carl, realizing what they're about to do, hurries into the shuttle and grabs the object, unaware that there was a bomb strapped to it. The bomb explodes, killing Carl in the process, and knowing that they had very little time before the ship gets incinerated, Kayla and Nick make it to their pod so that the ship can make the dimensional jump, and in the nick of time, the ship was able to make the jump and they're transported safely back to their own solar system. And the movie ends as we see Nick and Kayla safely arriving at their own solar system, holding each other in a small pod.